This is the Paddock Pass podcast. Welcome to another show, and today we're catching up with the latest news and talking points from the world of MotoGP. We're on podcast 391, a number of points that only David and Neil can dream of for their fantasy MotoGP teams. And after last week's dog-chewing internet cable episode for Steve English, I'm delighted to say we've jettisoned our superbike experts for the insane knowledge of Mr. Peter Bom for this show. Guten Morgen, Peter. Ready for Portimao?
Goedemorgen, Adam. Yeah, I'm ready to go, eager to go. Tomorrow it's train, plane, and so on. So, up for it.
I'm Adam Wheeler, as most will probably already know, and I'm joined by my other two delinquents on this show. Firstly, David Emmett, who I'm sure is already well stuffed on Portuguese cream cakes. And secondly, Neil Morrison, who, as a Liverpool Football Club fan, elicits no sporting sympathy whatsoever. Dave, how is the belt abuse?
Do you know what? I haven't had a single cream tart yet, or custard tart yet. So I have had lots of fish though, but so that's been good, and lots of walking, and that's what we're here for.
Just to inform people, David is already in Portimao. How long have you been there now? Nearly a week.
Basically a week. And last night we had a lovely dinner with Mrs. Susan Morrison, the mother of a certain podcast member, and it was delightful. It was lovely because she's down here for a week as well.
Speaking of which, Neil, beaten by the Manx, the shame.
Yeah, I mean, I was outside the city all weekend, so I'll just claim that I didn't really have the time to see it, which isn't really true. But yeah, it's fine to block that out of my memory. Thanks for bringing it up, Ed.
No worries. FA Cup drama, of course. Before we crack on, as you heard at the top of the show, we're backed by Rental Street. Yes, there are plenty of high quality and dependable accessories for your road bike at rental.com. But also those lovely people in the House of Brands at Mundafing, Austria are back in the show as well. KTM had their new 990 Duke, lots of torque, crazy power, handling, fantastic, a real pinnacle new model in the Duke range, which celebrates its 30th anniversary this year. So go and check it out on ktm.com for all the information and updates around that particular motorcycle.
I saw a KTM 990 yesterday, and it sounded class.
There we go. Peter, not only are you the smartest person that we ever sort of tend to have on the podcast, but now you're something of a podcast expert yourself. How's it going with the Oxbomb show? And is it nice to be on a production that's a lot less sweary?
Okay, where to start? Well, first of all, thanks, Adam, for having me on your show. It's a pleasure. What was your second question, actually?
No, I mean, how's it going with the podcasting? Because the Oxbomb stuff is, you started it last year, I'm guessing, around about Jerez time. I mean, it's been... You've had a good response.
Yeah, that was another word. Yeah, we started last year in Jerez, Matt Oxley and me, and it's growing steadily. I'm really enjoying doing it. I think Matt too. So it's fun doing it. We're getting a little bit better at it. And it's growing steadily. So we are on Patreon now since a couple of weeks, and that's also promising. It keeps us motivated to be there. And we're having lots of plans, but we have to be realistic. So first of all, it's big fun to do. And the feedback we get, mostly on social media, is also like making it worthwhile doing it. It's rewarding. So people seem to appreciate what we're doing and how we're doing it. And obviously we are both speaking about the same, your podcast and ours, but in the end, we still do it our own way, and they're different enough. I think I listen with all great pleasure to your guys' podcast more or less every time. I enjoyed it, and it's different than we do, but I still enjoy it. There's a lot of actually good information in it as well, so I'm stealing sometimes from you guys. Thanks for that.
And us from you.
Dave, did you want to come in there, or am I missing a message there? Okay. But Peter, I mean, you've got such a sort of varied background when it comes to working in racing, and you've done TV work as well. You've done some articles and written stuff. What's your kind of view now doing podcasting? I mean, do we think that people are listening or watching much more than they're reading? What's your kind of feelings on that?
Honestly, I have no idea. It's complicated. It's changing. It's not as clear cut as it used to be in the good old days. But I decided more or less to try things that are really like natural for me, like talking in a microphone with you guys, that's easy. Writing a technical article is not that easy, but still I managed to improve enough to keep doing it. But really to dig into it and try to find where is everybody listening at the moment, which portal we have to go to, I don't know. Matt and I, we are quite maybe almost tragic in that. We just do what we love to do and more or less do it as you should more or less do it for yourself and then see what's happened. So if at some point it turns out to be you need to be somewhere completely different or do it in a completely different way, then maybe it's just not for me. I'm not that chameleon. I'm just who I am. And but like I said earlier, it's very, at the moment it's very rewarding because the feedback is very positive. So at least some people seem to appreciate what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Have you got anything else on for 2024? I mean, in the Superbike Paddock, anything else on the technical side, not on the media side?
Yeah, I have to, because obviously this is not enough money-wise yet. I have my 2D business anyway, which runs over the whole year, which is actually now quite busy. This is the busiest time of the year when people bought stuff over the winter, and now they all go testing in Spain, like a national and European level racing, and then stuff doesn't work or whatever, firewalls, new computers, sensors. So I'm quite busy with that at the moment. I managed to find a team that still wants to accept me. No. I wasn't really keen in looking into having a position in a team in the GP paddock, because that's way too stressful. 22 events, even if it's now 21, I really won't do that anymore. Superbikes is already a lot less. But I was looking for something with less events, and I found something. I think you guys have I can tell it here because it's more or less official now. So you guys are the first. I'm going to Moto America next year to do work for BMW in a super stock team over Alpha Racing, which is like the Yoshimura from Suzuki, and they are from BMW. So I found a team that has only 5 or 6 events in total, which is beautiful for me. It suits me very, very well. And at the same time, it's unbelievable interesting. The bike is, now we can speak about the BMW Superbike a little bit, even without Steve. It's a complicated thing. It's a complicated bike. But I like a lot the package that BMW puts there on the grid. For me as a technician to work with that bike, both on the mechanical side, deciding what you want to do, its pivot, its link, or its springs, or don't touch it at all. And the electronic package, it's quite impressive. So I spent some time in Germany getting my lessons and learning my stuff there. And I can't wait to go to the first event in America. Like I said, it's a nice package that I like. It's a nice championship. I was there only once, and it's a long time ago. And it's just not too many events. So it still gives me some room on the calendar to meet you guys in the media center of different MotoGP races, where my heart is definitely as well.
Well done for trying to persuade us, Peter. But a Dutchman wanting to go to America, I doubt has much to do with the racing and probably more to do with the climate. But I'm sure it'll be an interesting adventure. Dave, so you wanted to come in there, but also there was some recent rumors that BMW might be looking to step more into Grand Prix again. Is that just wild hearsay, do we think, or could there be something in it?
Well, the exact quote was, "We're not ruling anything out." Which is because it was actually part of a much bigger interview with, I think, the head of one of the senior people inside BMW, and they talked about sort of models and all sorts of things. It's in the German magazine Motorrad, which is just a general motorcycle magazine. So the entire interview was actually about, basically, BMW and BMW's motorcycle and their range and stuff. Of course, they are very keen to talk about motorbikes because of the 1300 GS, which has just come out, which is, like relaunching their biggest brand. Their most popular model is a huge thing. So yeah, I wouldn't say it was a throwaway remark. He did talk a little bit about. He did actually go into some depth about racing and saying that the trouble with they're looking at because I think they're also involved in World Endurance. Peter? Yeah, exactly. So they've got quite a big World Endurance. Obviously, they're putting a lot of effort into superbikes. The problem with superbikes at the moment is there's only 12 races and only one of them is outside Europe, which is a bit difficult. From what I understand, like Superbike are trying to expand their calendar again. They're trying to get tracks outside of Europe back on the calendar again. again. But it's not easy. So maybe that'll change in a couple of times. But obviously, everyone is looking towards the 2027 technical regulations, and the 2027 technical regulations with a change in engine capacity, ride height device has gone a different level of aerodynamics. So I think my understanding is that is still the basically the one topic that everyone is discussing, that they're arguing about. Some manufacturers want lots of aerodynamics. I'll let you fill in the names, and other manufacturers don't want any, or want as little aerodynamics as possible. So it's if you're going to come in as a new factory, then especially when an engine spec change, that's the ideal time, because everyone's going to have to redesign their engine anyway, and it gives you a little bit more of a if you like of a level playing field.
Well, I mean, we were going to talk about this a little bit later on the podcast, but let's just jump into it now. I mean, Neil, coming to you, there is talk that, the rules are going to change. Also, Peter, I want to know your opinion on this. For 2027, do you think we're giving it more attention now, or maybe fans or followers of MotoGP are looking at it more just because of the current state of MotoGP, where there is a lot of talk of downforce, some difficulty in overtaking, the bikes are incredibly narrowly matched? Do you think this latest technical sort of round, which, to be honest, maybe wouldn't years ago have generated that much interest, is now suddenly of much more importance?
I think that's probably right, Ad. It's one of the common complaints we've had in our podcast over the last 2 years, that it's not necessarily helping the racing. We've had some great racing over the past couple of years, but we've also had some rather tedious affairs. You could argue that maybe the race in Qatar was quite tedious, with the exception of one stellar rookie who was mixing things up. And I think the common consensus, from what I can see from reading people's comments on social media, online, is that bikes have gone a bit too far in one direction, and they do need to be reined in somewhat. But I think it's also just the fact that it will be such a massive shakeup. I mean, a change of engine capacity, doesn't happen that often. The fact that we're talking about downscaling the capacity is a big thing, and obviously didn't have the best effect the last time we did that in 2007. I think there's a real sense of interest in just how they're going to work the regulations, and how they're going to make it so they can kind of make the racing so good again. Because for about 5 or 6 years after Michelin came in as the sole tire supplier, we had racing as good as any time in history, I think. But the last couple of years, maybe some of the inventions and innovations that have come in have dampened that somewhat. So I think there's definitely lots of reasons for it to be so highly anticipated.
I have a question for Peter, because I'm really interested in your opinion. So it looks like we'll be going to 850cc. We will have probably a 75mm ball, which means you'll have almost identical stroke, but 75mm ball, slightly smaller ball, which, if my maths is correct, means that we'll still have very similar rev limits. You're not actually going to make the bike's rev any lower. The reason from going from 800cc to 1000cc is just having an excess of torque, because what they wanted was, to have the bikes sliding again, to have the bikes moving around again, to have the bikes, basically overwhelm the tire, because otherwise all that was happening with the 800cc bikes was a lot of corner speed. So I suppose my question is, are we going to see the 800cc style racing again, or are we going to see 1000cc racing again? Is it going to be like the early years of the thousands, or is it going to be like the 800cc ball fest all over again?
Well, first of all, I think all we do is follow the tires. So the tires determine the type of racing that we get, not the engine capacity. It's the tire. So the Bridgestone tires lead to a certain type of racing. That was Bridgestone racing. Now we're having difference. Dorna should be very, very worried. Just like Neil already said, the comments we see, and these are people that bother to comment. It's very simple. The comments come all down to, we want to see proper bike racing again. And you can put different layers in that, in how you look at it, or what is really the reason, or what is not the reason. But they want to see proper racing again. And that's not that complicated to do. We all know where proper racing went when we allowed the ride height devices and lots of aero. The engine capacity, as I think it is now, is more a reason to attach the downforce that we have too much. The current bikes can create, they have such an excess of power that they can transfer a lot of that horsepower or that torque or whatever into downforce, and that leads to scrap racing. So by having a smaller engine capacity, like you said with the RPM that is the result of the bore and stroke, we certainly will have a good drop in power. So that's already one hand tied to the back. The other one is, like they're speaking about the frontal area restriction, the maximum frontal area. That's not going to put aero back in the box. Aero's there, and it was always there. We just forgot about it, and we didn't really pay attention to it, but it was always there. It's the angle of your windscreen, it's everything. So it's just that we don't want to see, I think Dorna realized that they don't want to have full Formula One bikes with just two wheels, but they like the fact that they are looking this high tech. So they're looking for something in between. But we definitely need to go away from where we are now, where racing is in a way too easy and too much dictated, too easy to go fast on a MotoGP bike, and it's too much dictated by the current state of technology from the manufacturers. You have to make it a little bit more raw again. And for that, it's quite logical to speak about the boring stroke and the capacity and the wings. I would love to see, I think there's already talk about it, a fuel flow maximum, like a regulation on a maximum fuel flow, because that forces manufacturers to create more efficient engines. If you limit the amount of fuel the engine can burn, your only way out, your only way to improve, to still have more horsepower than the competition, is make the whole burning process more efficient, which can come from investing more in better materials. That's definitely an interesting area, because we all will profit from it. That's one of the reasons we started racing, or at least it's the excuse why we go racing.
I just wanted to sort of add to that. We're seeing fuel flow restrictions being introduced in World Superbikes next year. This year, they are monitoring it. All the bikes will have sensors on. Basically, the idea is to gather data this year to make decisions, or to be able to make good, solid regulations for next year. So we'll have to wait and see about that. But I rather suspect that the introduction of fuel flow regulations in World Superbikes is it's basically like a test case or a test bed for a possible introduction in MotoGP in the future as well. Yeah. Although whether that is a big like a big rule change and would have to wait for the end of a contract period, or whether I could actually, or whether they could actually introduce it sort of halfway through a rule period, because I think 2027 would be too early for MotoGP, but. Well, we'll see. I mean, I think we're going to see the 2027 technical regulations very, very quickly.
Surely one of the chief reasons for change is going to be getting a curb on top speed as well. 366 kilometers an hour. Was that 227 miles per hour? That maybe is another reason for engine change. But I was just curious about the MSMA and their reaction to these possible bigger overhauls, because, I mean, if you look at Ducati in 2022, they sold 60,000 bikes. It was their biggest ever, but then that dipped last year. It was actually less. KTM they've had something like 13 years of continual growth, but then in 2023, it was marginal. The Japanese are in a position where they have to spend that much more extra in MotoGP alone just to be competitive. I mean, do these companies actually have the extra budget and resources to suddenly develop new platforms for racing? That's something I guess is up in the air.
I mean, the reason that they only have a rule change every 5 years is to be able to contain costs, so that everyone knows that they are on that they can continue to develop that platform for a fixed period of time. But the trouble with progress is that at some point you end up going so fast that, the fact that, Moto2 is now going as fast as the 500s were. I think the Moto3 bikes are lapping as fast as the 500s are. That's just the way that's just the way it is. So sometimes you have to sort of step in. And of course, you also, one of the reasons to go racing is to collect lots and lots of data. And so you also have to go and follow the direction that production bikes are going to. The manufacturers want to get data out that they can then sort of use in production. A lot of it is marketing exercise, but there's also sort of, it's a place to experiment and learn about things. I think we're seeing a lot of the aerodynamics lessons, for example, going into actually making road bikes more comfortable, which is amazing. I'm told that the latest Multistrada, Ducati Multistrada, is actually really good because they used, in terms of turbulence on a big adventure bike, the turbulence on most things is horrible because you're sitting a long way away from the windscreen, but they actually sort of tuned that a little bit to using some of the lessons from MotoGP, some of the aerodynamics things that they've learned to make it, much, much better.
Yeah, David, and let's not forget the ride height device and the different functions that we have with the aerodynamics. It started always, aerodynamics used to be the thing for having more top speed. And then it was a thing that, like creating downforce during the wheels. But at the moment, they are working more or less at different subjects at the same time. Like, okay, you want to have less resistance to have a reasonable top speed. Yeah, but the main target is and still is now, and it was not when it started, is to create the right, correct type of downforce during the cornering to have the grip where you want it in the corners and the first meters out of the corners on the exit. That's a combination of aero and the acceleration. For me, that's the thing that we should speak more about, and Donna should be really, really worried about. The ride height devices. They are now, the way what they created is that it's almost a little bit too easy to be quite fast on a MotoGP bike, which is not what we want. And not taking away anything, I have to be careful here how to say it, because Pedro Costa, you have to mention him. But what he did in Valencia, when he jumped the first time on the bike, was of course the result of his big talent, but also because it's too easy. If you drop the rear ride height just on the right moment, and that you don't need 20 laps to find that right moment. And actually KTM have it half automatically dropping. So that's already done for you. You just sort of book the ride height device to go down after the corner. Before you go to that corner, you book it, you turn the switch, the lever, and then it will automatically go down on the right moment. So all Pedro has to do is brace himself and open the throttle. And the proof was in that when guys like Binder came to MotoGP, their top speeds in the first day of testing were all over the place, were very, very different, because the top speed is not the top speed that the bike can reach. It's just before we start braking, but we are still hugely accelerating the bike. And that acceleration number, we call it top speed, is just, especially in Valencia, a result of how fast you get out of the last corner, which by now is all done by the ride height device. At that time, it was definitely not. So, of course, Acosta is a huge talent, but he's not. That's much better than Binder when Binder jumped on a MotoGP bike. So, ride height devices make it a little bit easier for everybody to be fast, and it stops one of the main joker cards that exceptional talents have to overtake. We see overtakings happening on the braking, but usually they started on the exit of the corner before. If you find that little bit extra drive on the tire after it has the first drop, and your name is, for example, Marc Marquez, you're dead smooth and gentle with the throttle, and you're picking the bike exactly up right on the moment where the tire gets on the drive side, and you're using the right corrective spin. You find that little bit of acceleration, and you're already almost beside the guy for the next braking. So lots of outbrake actions have started on acceleration by pure talent and control. And now all the accelerations are the same. So you can't force many overtaking options by having a better exit. So you have to rely on really outbraking him, which is at the same time extra difficult because of all that aero and all the dirty air. So we are in a position that Donna definitely realizes we should be lucky with every entertaining race that we still have. And next weekend's quite likely is going to be really entertaining because that's a special track. But we can't rely on them too many. So they have to work on ride high devices and that's where they're working on. Engine capacity is one of the ways to get there, in my opinion.
Let's move on from the motorcycles themselves to talk about some of the riders, because the big news this week, news in that not a great surprise, but it was still officially confirmed that Fermin Aldeguer will be stepping up from Moto2 next year in 2025 and will be an official Ducati rider for a 2-year period. Neil, straight to you. What's your thoughts on this? We knew it was potentially coming. No confirmation of what team that Fermin's going to be filling a spot at, but you have to imagine it's going to be Jorge Martin's place in Prima Pramac Racing. And then, of course, that means somebody from the grid next year is going to be in a different series or staying at home.
Yeah, exactly. Or riding for a different factory, perhaps. It's a good move. I think it's a great move for Fermin, because I think this year in Moto2, things are going to be very up and down. It's going to maybe take a while for certain riders, certain teams, certain chassis to find the optimum setup with the new Pirelli tires. And we saw that in the first race of the season. Two of the chief favourites for the title, Tony Arbolino and Fermin Aldeguer, were out of the points. They were 25 and 30 seconds respectively off the victor. I can see some other races where some of the top names are kind of similarly flummoxed, or they make the wrong tire choice and they really suffer. So I think for Fermin to have this deal done at this stage of the season is excellent. It means that, he's not going to be panicking every time he has a bad race. Ducati, I think they've taken a punt to a certain extent. We're sort of basing this move on essentially the last 7-8 races of last year, which is quite a short time period to make an assessment on a rider. But in that time, you have to say what Fermin was doing in Moto2 was absolutely fantastic and sensational. I spoke to Agura's crew chief, Norman Rank, during preseason testing. Obviously, Agura has moved not just teams, but chassis manufacturers. He's moved across to the Boscoscuro chassis this year in the MT Helmets MSI squad. And it was quite a good move from Luca Boscoscuro to put 2 more chassis on the grid, get more information, have more data to kind of understand things when the Pirelli tires have come in. And Norman Rank was telling me that they could look at Aldeguer's data from the end of last year and said it was absolutely fantastic. They had the impression at the time that it was the chassis that was doing all the work, but he said from what he could see, it was 80% rider, 20% chassis. So I think he's a massive talent. I mean, he is the youngest ever pole sitter in the Moto2 class. But there is the caveat that we're basing this sort of MotoGP ride off essentially 5 or 6 races at the end of last year. He does need to kind of show a bit more of that, I feel, to really give us the impression that he's a superstar of the future. But I do think he has the potential to be fantastic. And, not every rider has made Pedro Acosta look quite ordinary, and Aldeguer certainly did that at the end of last year.
A question first to Dave, and then another one to Peter. Dave, is 2 years actually enough? I mean, Aldeguer still has plenty to learn. You look at the examples of recent riders, maybe Fabio Di Giannantonio being one of them. These guys need a couple of seasons. Raul Fernandez, another one, a big sort of team and manufacturer change involved there, of course. But and then also, what do you think could happen to Jorge Martin? Where will he end up? I mean, he's obviously going to be a factory rider, you would assume, for 2025. And then, Peter, do you think that Fermin is, the latest type of young rider? He carries this kind of versatile riding style that's just necessary to conquer in MotoGP these days. For you first, Dave.
I've almost forgotten your question.
It's 2 years enough.
It's 2 years. Yeah, it's 2 years enough. I don't think it. I mean, yes, it is, because the other thing is it's not just 2 years; it's 2 plus 2. So it's 2 years with an option for 2 more years, and the option will be for Ducati rather than for Aldeguer. If you think about it, both Pecco Bagnaia and Jorge Martin, when they came into the class, they went into a satellite operation. They had opportunities to show what they were capable of. You know, they had flashes, especially in their first year. They had flashes, and then there were times when they were just invisible or they just messed up. Those are the sort of things that you have to learn in your first year in MotoGP. You definitely need 2 years. The point is in that second year to be able to show that you're really competitive, no matter what the circumstances are. So I think that, yes, definitely 2 years is going to be enough for Aldeguer. And also it's quite, Ducati have form on signing riders early, because I remember being at the Ducati launch in Bologna in 2020 before COVID hit, and reading, I bought a Gazzetta dello Sport, I think, and in there, I was going through there and saw that they'd already signed, Ducati had already signed Jorge Martin for 2021. And that was, mid-January. So it's very common for, this is just...
Same with Pecco.
Yeah, exactly. This is Ducati's modus operandi, really. Sign them very, very early, get to them before anyone else can, and see what you can do. So yeah, no, I think 2 years is fine.
You're just showing off that you can understand a bit of Italian now, aren't you? Nobody likes a smart Alec, Dave. What about George Martin then? What do you foresee his future being?
Honestly, I don't know. My sense is that the prime motivator for any rider change is usually being dissed. So if they feel disrespected, literally, if they feel they're not getting enough respect from their from the team that they're riding for or the manufacturer they're riding for, that's the main reason for them leaving. If you look back at all the big ones, Jorge Lorenzo, Casey Stoner to an extent, the biggest one, obviously Valentino Rossi leaving Honda to go to Yamaha. That was all because, he felt he wasn't getting enough respect for what he was doing. And then he left Yamaha to go to Ducati when he felt that, Jorge Lorenzo was getting too much, was getting treated too well by Yamaha. So it's extremely, this is the reason. So I suspect that Jorge Martin is not all that inclined to stay with Ducati, but it's difficult because it is quite clearly the best bike on the grid. There's no room in KTM. KTM are full up. Aprilia is competitive. They could go there, but I'm not sure how much money Aprilia will have. Actually, they'll probably have sort of some cash floating around. This is the other thing with Ducati. Ducati do not pay people. Basically, Pecco Bagnaia is now on a very good salary, but only because he's won 2 championships. Basically, you get a very low base salary, and you get paid bonuses. So they pay you to perform. And I don't think that Ducati are interested in having 2 highly paid riders. I don't think. I mean, once upon a time, Philip Morris would have stumped up the cash, but Philip Morris just aren't, funding Ducati the way that they used to, and so yeah, they don't have the money. I think they could go anywhere. I think he could try take a punt on Honda, or he could take a punt on Yamaha, depending on if those bikes are going to be competitive. And I think Yamaha, if it looks like Quartararo is going to leave, then I think that Yamaha could end up throwing a lot of money at Martin, because obviously we know that they've tried to hire him before, that they throw a lot of money at him in the hope that he would come across to replace Quartararo if Quartararo were to leave. So honestly, I don't think it's at all settled. All we know that he's definitely going to be in a factory team.
Peter, what do you think of Aldeguer as a rider?
Not so easy to jump on the bandwagon. It was for me to praise him, that it was so logic that he goes MotoGP, because he was on a bike that not many other riders were on, and the Boscoscura bike is not bad. It's quite good, but it's quite special. So it has its own track where it was almost too easy, and it had probably places where it was not that easy. But without many other riders on the same material, it was always difficult to judge him. But the last half of last year was quite convincing that he made a step in his head, especially. He believed more in himself, was more sure. So how riders do in Moto2, honestly, the way I look at riders to see if they are interesting riders for MotoGP is how quickly they learn the ropes coming from Moto3 to Moto2, because that's a huge step. If that takes 5 years, if it's Tom Lutz, Tito Rabat or whatever, forget about it. It has to be really, really quickly, like Raúl Fernandez, quick. That was very, 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 very quick. Brad Binder, quick. These are the guys that immediately also make the jump to MotoGP, because there you have to learn so many different things in so little time, that the main thing I look at is how they make that jump from MotoG to Moto2. He made it quite well, and his background is even more interesting because he once was already on small bikes. I think he was champion on the European Talent Cup or something like that. And then, because he had no money, he ended up riding super sports in Spain, but blew everybody away. I know it's not a world championship level, but if you jump on a 600 and immediately dominate it, then later going from a 600 super sport to a Moto2 bike in the end, also still in the junior world championship in Spain, he immediately won again. And the jump from a production 600 to a Moto2 bike is huge. That's so different. It's almost a disadvantage to have ridden super sport bikes before you go to a Moto2. That's almost a disadvantage. So these steps, because I obviously studied his history a little bit now we all speak more about him, made it completely logic. So in a way, he could be a little bit like Fabio Quartararo, who was unbelievable when he was young, then lost the plot big time, and was lucky enough that Yamaha wanted to go to a young, talented rider and took the guy that was just starting to win again. But for sure, they didn't sign him because he won the latest Moto2 race. They did sign him because when he was 14, he was too good to be true. So you can lose your speed, but you don't lose your talent. And I think it's a little bit for Fermin the same. So I'm curious. Obviously, Qatar was a full disaster, but everybody has had a lot of reasons to explain what happened in Qatar. Even the guys on the podium are probably just lucky because the Pirelli tires are shaking things up hugely at the moment in Moto2. So that doesn't scare me or Ducati at all. And knowing Ducati, they did a lot of investigation around the guy, who's his friends, his family, his background, his attitude, how he works in the box. Because that's going to be another main important thing when you go to MotoGP. That's so hard to be in the box as a young MotoGP rider in a new team. This can be so hard. And they want to make sure that he has the character to be highly likely the new guy. So that's what I think, yeah.
Just before we close this subject, Neil, last year there was a lot of buzz about Tony Arbolino being the next one to move up from Moto2. There was obviously a lot of rumor mongering going on around Jake Dixon as well, Ayagura, being the next kind of Japanese rider in MotoGP. This is the first movement we've seen from the intermediate class to the premier class. I mean, if you had to put any of your closely guarded Euro notes on the next possible switch, I mean, who would it be? I mean, would Joe Roberts to Trackhouse be something, or would we need to look somewhere else?
I think it's way too early to say, Ad, just because we don't really know how the straws are going to fall in Moto2 this year. There's all those names that you mentioned. If they win the next 3 or 4 races, they're going to be on the radar of MotoGP teams for sure. But I'm not sure that we're going to see that. I think we're going to see quite a lot of mixed and varied results certainly in the first half of the season. So, there's maybe 6-7 guys that if they have a brilliant season, our brilliant first half of the season will be on the radars of the MotoGP factories. But I think it's too early to say. Yeah, you could say Dixon, you could say Arbolino, you could maybe even say Alonso Lopez, who stepped up again, it looks like, this year. But I think it's too early to kind of say, like, one of these guys is definitely going to be in MotoGP, because there's still so much of a way to go.
Fly Racing have been showing off some cool LE kit in AMA Supercross recently. If you're an off-road rider, then get your hands on the 2024 Lite, that's L-I-T-E, or Evo DST gear for unbeatable fit and durability at a great price. Then there's also the highly advanced Formula S helmet, featuring tech that could save your life and get you urgent assistance in the event of a crash, Zone Pro goggles, and much more. Have a look at flyracing.com for the full Monty. Seeing as we've got 2 Dutchmen on the show, and Neil, if they start sort of talking like they're on the Muppet Show, then you and I will have to find something else to do. We wanted to talk about some Netherlands love. Peter first, is Colin Bayer the best Dutch prospect, in an age in MotoGP? And, also maybe on a more slightly serious note, do tall guys really pay the price in Moto3? I mean, if you think of, say, Carlos Tatai, I mean, he was a rider that always lamented the fact that, he was sort of disadvantaged for top speed and overtaking just because of his physique and his size. And Colin is not the smallest rider on the current Moto3 grid. So, David and Peter, just let us know what you think about Colin and whether, the Netherlands can really pin some hopes on him.
You, David, or me first?
You could go first.
Well, yes, he's the best thing since a long time, looks like. And that's not just based on the results, but more the character, the attitude, the way he works. That impressed me the most. He's so critical on himself in a healthy way. He doesn't get carried away when he had one or two slipstreams in the qualifying lap and he's on the front row. He doesn't look any different in the paddock. Because I know his family, I know where they come. They come actually 20 minutes from my house, more or less. So I think I once supported his father or his uncle when they were heavily involved in racing Supersport 600 bikes from 10K racing when I was there. So I know the family. I know that the village where they come from, the type of guys that grow there, and that is even more interesting for me, more promising than the speed. But it has to come with the speed. And the way he picked up the speed last year was already more than enough to catch your attention. But from inside the team and speaking to the people around it, but also just listening what he tells to the press, that made me a lot more happy. That gives me the feeling that he is the real deal at the moment. Not saying anything wrong about a guy like Zonta, and because he's also doing. You have not to forget how young these kids are, and they come from different backgrounds, so they do it in a different way, and there are different roads to Rome. But the hottest thing at the moment for me, the most promising thing, has to be Colin Bayer, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to completely agree. I interviewed Colin last year, and he's just the way he's got his head screwed on right. Basically, he's really, really, he's really. I mean, he's really calm. He's really focused. He doesn't get overexcited. He was sort of really downplaying some of his achievements. He knew what he was capable of. Also, he's got the proper attitude. He's got he's very aggressive. He's a fighter. He's not going to give up. He's not going to give up when things don't go his way. He came up through. I mean, look, he moved down to Spain. His family moved him down to Spain when he was quite young. So he's been racing in the Spanish Championship. He did it. He approached the thing the whole way. But yeah, he's very impressive for a lot of reasons. But exactly as Peter says, the most impressive thing is his attitude and his approach to racing, which is he has exactly the right attitude to succeed. He seems to have a lot of talent as well. Do I think he's going to be MotoGP champion? No, I don't think he is. But I do think he will end up in MotoGP. I think he is currently the sort of the Netherlands' best hope of seeing a MotoGP rider, and I think he'd be very good and very entertaining in MotoGP. Even though it's way too early to be talking about it, really. He's got this year in Moto3 and then move up to Moto2, and I think we'll really see the measure of him, as Peter was saying earlier. You'll see the real measure of him when he gets on a Moto2 bike and how quickly he adapts.
Yeah, I think you look at Colin's results last year from Mugello, which was about a third of the way through the season. He was fighting for the top six every single weekend, and when it was sort of towards the end of the season, he was fighting for podiums pretty much every weekend. So that was a pretty remarkable thing in just his rookie season. Had it not been for David Alonso, I think Bayer would have been the big sort of shock of the Moto3 class last year. And just to add something on Zonta, I think Peter mentioned we are talking about young kids. I mean, I had to remind myself just before we did round one that Zonta's still only 18. This is his third year in the World Championship. Came in as a 16-year-old. So difficult to go in without any previous World Championship experience in Moto3. In fact, I don't think he had really ridden a Moto3 bike, if I'm not mistaken. So to jump in Moto2 with that background and be completely up against it and not sink without a trace. I think that shows that Zonta certainly has a kind of mental toughness, which you need to have in the intermediate class. I don't think it's easy for him coming from the background that he has, where his dad was a 2-time Moto or 500cc pole sitter. One of the probably the most famous Dutch motorcycle export of the 1990s. Can't be easy coming into sort of in your father's, coming out of your father's shadow. So some things that people were telling me in Qatar about Zonta, he's lost something like 5 kilos over the off season. He wasn't a big or heavy guy before then, so he's really worked hard on his fitness. And one crew chief was telling me that's not working with Zonta was saying, yeah, he's the guy that he thinks has stepped up in the class over the off season. So maybe he's not on the same level talent wise as Colin, but I think there's reason to be positive. There's reason to think that Zonta can spring a few surprises this year as well.
Yeah, and that's interesting, Neil, because we forgot to answer the question from Adam about longer riders having a disadvantage, yes or no. And when Zonta is losing kilos, you know why he does that, and that's Moto2. And he does it also because he knows the new tires are going to be very, very sensitive for my weight. Do longer riders have a disadvantage, Adam, in Moto3? Usually, yes. Especially when it's harder to sit aerodynamically very, very nice on the Moto3 bikes, and the latest Moto3 bikes from KTM are even smaller than they used to be. So this year's Moto3 bike is definitely smaller than it was last year, and Colin hasn't shrunk, so that's hard. Only in one very specific situation where you're in the straight and when you are tucked in really perfectly, there is sometimes a little advantage because you keep the air longer attached to your back, and then the wind behind you is like more calm, which is just a result from being aerodynamically just in a better position. But everything before and after that is usually a downside, especially if it also comes with the extra kilos, which usually comes with longer. So Colin is very, very much aware, like Zonta, of his weight for another reason as Zonta, but maybe for the same reason that it's for the performance. When you're longer, it's not nice. On the other hand, once you're in MotoGP, it can almost be an advantage. Look at Marquez and Martin, how unbelievable acrobatic things they have to do just to get that little bit of extra weight deeper on the inside of the bike. And the longer riders can have an advantage there, unless they are Petrucci long, then it's already long with heavy. And Marini is crying a little bit as well. He has bigger problems at the moment, but he used to cry a little bit as well. And Marini is not fat. So there you go.
Yeah, speaking to Dennis Onju, he's delighted to be in Moto2 at the moment. He said last year, in fact, the last 3 years in Moto3, he said the most physical part of a Moto3 lap would be the straight, because he was having to do everything in his power to try and tuck in. It was more physical than standing up, braking, pitching into the turn, accelerating. So, that gives you an idea of how difficult it is for some of the kind of taller guys to basically make themselves aerodynamic in the little bikes.
Well, Onchu is not even that tall, is he?
No,
and it's really physically uncomfortable. I know that riders have had real problems, physical problems, having to go to the physio to basically get themselves folded up. It's very similar to cycling, for example, the same sort of thing, where you're taking on an incredibly unnatural body position, just with all sorts of things folded up into different places, and it's just causing you sort of massive muscle problems.
We're on to the Algarve International Circuit next, otherwise known as Portimao. Peter, you were mentioning that this could be one of the more interesting races, or it could be closer. Even in terms of data, it must be one of the weirdo circuits on the calendar, right? I mean, there's not many places that are quite similar in terms of the trajectory and the nature and the undulations.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely. Thanks for getting me started about Portimao. I love it. I remember going there the first time when it was really actually the first time probably anybody got there. It was World Superbikes, whatever, 1,000 years ago.
2009.
Okay, 2009.
My first race as a professional journalist, so I remember.
Yeah, they were still fixing the toilets and everything, and we were building the pit box up, and the trucks hardly could get to the track because the main road that's now there wasn't there, and the small roads. So anyway, it wasn't. And then I remember we laughed, we walked the track, and we were saying, "Fuck, I can't believe it. MotoGP is unbelievable. Nah, even superbikes, nah, that's hard." It's Brands Hatch on steroids, and here we are, MotoGPs, but. Yeah, it is possible. It is possible. It's not. It is possible to do MotoGP races there, but they are very, very special for the riders, for all of them. And it shoots you or it doesn't shoot you, but you get a lot of specific requests thrown at you. But usually it leads to it leads to good racing, and that's down to the fact that it's had so much up and down. I think it goes 30 meters up and down. Sometimes you go up 16 meters, or you drop 12 meters in a short time. And at least 3 times a lap, you have to turn in without seeing where you're actually going to. 2 of the 3 times, you have to put it on your knee before you see for what you're doing it. And that's, so you have at least have a decent memory. It's not the area for a goldfish. But okay, all these riders have that. But at the same time, the way the bike behaves when you have these big sinks, these big uphill changes, the G-forces on the bike are so unreal. You never get them anywhere in the world on any other track. So it is a testimony of your talent, how quickly you pick up what the bike is doing. And because it does something unnatural, unreal. If you drop, the famous corner where everybody jumps, it's turn 6, turn 8, and then you go to turn 9, which is the Greg Jones corner. That's a very, very fitting name, actually, because Greg was not scared. And that's a corner where you don't crash. Turn 9 is the hardest corner from Portimao, and you never crash there. You almost never see people crash there. But it's a ballsy thing to do, because you drop down, you have to go to the right to the curbs, but the bike is so light on the drop down, and suddenly it takes all the G-force. It must be so deep in the suspension. Well, at least it was when I was looking data under there. It's really, really deep in the suspension, and it becomes really like it doesn't want to change a direction at all. You still want to go. You need it to go left, but it just wants to sit where it sits, and I want to go to the travel trap. So to the gravel trap. It's really hard for riders to get familiar with how the bike feels through that corner. And that's just one of the more examples. You have the most extreme one. There is a reason Miguel Oliveira once won that GP, and that's the main reason. He knew the track inside out. It's one of the few tracks that are so difficult that riders don't learn it in one weekend. Even after Sunday, and even if they denied it when we asked them, they didn't understand it fully. It was the only way to explain Miguel Oliveira's fantastic win on that moment with the KTM. It's a really strange track. And you need to have a little bit of everything, but especially a very, very good feeling with the front. Some of the corners are having, are off-camber corners. Yeah. And the most ballsy one is the last one, where also people usually don't crash because you really, really don't want to crash into turn 15. If you exit 14, you already drop down very quickly. You short shift, and all you do into 15 is close the throttle and pray for the front to hold. You need to have the front there and just want to go wide. It's so fast. So all the time you're sitting there in 15, trusting the front, and ticking down in the clock mentally when to start opening the gas. You don't see for what you're doing it. You have to decide when you start to open it. When you start to open it, it starts to drift to the outside. And really, really late, like Phillip Island late, you see where you are going to. And you have to exit over the curbs to do the lap perfectly. And then just when you're on the curbs and trying to put it upright, you'll go over the crest, which makes it really like hell. And just before the crash, or just after, it's yours to find out, you have to drop the rear right high device at the exact right moment. Otherwise, it will wheel you all the straight and cost you all the speed. And so there's a couple of places that are very, very interesting. By now, all of them have been there enough. But still, it's a challenge. And a couple of times, the door is wide open for any pass that anybody wants to put on you. There's 2 times you go down to first gear. You have to be turn 13. You have to be a master of the rear brake. But the one I want to speak about is turn 3, actually, the really tight right-hander. I was with Carl Crutzlow as his data guy in Supersport 600, and I couldn't believe how much rear brake, how accurate he was on the rear brake in that tight right-hand corner. That's probably a 55 kilometer per hour corner, because you can't exit it on the left. It's first gear, and he was holding full on to the rear brake. But try to do that on a bike with that lean angle with your right feet. He did it, and that was one of his tricks to find the speed there. So yeah, it has a lot, but you need a good memory and balls and a really good front tire. I'm up for it.
Well, you mentioned balls. Maybe we should talk about Pedro Acosta for the moment. Peter, but also Dave and Neil jump in. Perhaps we shouldn't expect the same kind of excellence or surprises that we had from the rookie, that we saw in Qatar, at least. I mean, Marc Marquez as well was another one saying, you have to be a bit more realistic with expectations around me in Portimao. Again, this is a track, as you say, that's incredibly hard to master, and the guys have not been testing there in pre-season. So it's going to be like a real period of discovery for those two names, even though Acosta and Raul Fernandez are two riders who have won in Moto3 and Moto2. But you'd imagine that the chances of Pedro doing or grabbing that first win in Portimao are going to be extremely remote come this weekend.
Yeah, also for the crew chiefs, because they've got to set up the bike as well. They don't know. In fact, Frankie Carcetti just posted on Twitter that he's really sort of excited and interested to find out exactly what's going to happen, because he hasn't got a clue really. You don't know what's going to go in there. You're going to go in there with your base setup from testing, tweak it. You'll tweak the suspension for the various braking forces and all the rest of it. But then you've got to try and figure out whether it's going to work or not, and whether your rider can get the bike stopped, whether he can get it turned, what they can actually do with the bike that you've given them, and what they're going to need from it. And there is no time to do any setup now. I mean, the advantage is it does look like we're going to have just really good weather all 3 days, and so there will be time on the bike to set it up during on Friday morning and Saturday afternoon. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what those people who changed bikes, people like Marc Marquez and Pedro Acosta, can actually do. I think it's going to be a real measure of how good they are to see how far they go. But to expect them to be anywhere near the podium, I think is completely unrealistic. But it's going to be much more about who they've got behind them rather than who they've got ahead of them.
Neil, it's been a devilish track for some riders. Enea Bastianini, Miguel Oliveira. I mean, we know very well the injuries that were suffered there, Pol Espargaro especially in 2023. But it's also been a good track for some other riders. I mean, if you had to we'll get onto predictions in a minute, but I mean, if we had to advise listeners as who might be hot this weekend, who would be inclined to describe Jack Miller as someone who's had, good results there, a fantastic fight with Franco Morbidelli in years past. And of course, where he made his KTM debut last year, he sort of takes to the track like a duck to water. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, those are interesting points, Ed. I think this has been a good track for Alex Marquez as well in the past, one of his better ones on the calendar. Last year was great for the Aprilias too. We obviously saw Pecco have a controlled victory on the Sunday, but Maverick Vinales had one of his best races of the season, finishing just behind him. And there were points in that first race last year, the Sunday one, when Maverick maybe gave the impression that he was able to maybe pull Pecco in, but he wasn't quite able to do that. But nevertheless, both him and Espargaro were very, very strong. It will be interesting to see the sprint this year, because last year's sprint was obviously absolutely chaotic. It was amazing entertainment, but it was also scary and pretty dangerous in parts. And obviously we lost Enea to that pretty bad shoulder injury early on. Will things have calmed down a little bit? Guys maybe won't be just throwing absolutely everything into those opening couple of laps like they were last year. But yeah, I think keep an eye on Aprilia, because I think their potential wasn't quite fulfilled in Qatar, and Aleix is in great form at the moment. So I think he could be someone to watch.
Yeah, I mean, one difference with last year is last year we had the test here. And it was the first race of the year. And the first races of the year, I mean, basically, they've had 3 months off, and they're full of testosterone, adrenaline, and various other a dangerous cocktail of hormones. And that, I think, was one of the reasons for the absolute carnage that we saw there. I don't think we'll see quite so much carnage. We've had the first race. Everyone's got an idea of what's going on. They haven't tested there, so they don't have everything dialed in. So I think it'll be a little bit more of it'll be a little bit calmer. We won't see so many injuries.
Peter, every single manufacturer has a rider or riders that have sorted out their technical package. I mean, we think of Ducati, you have Bagnaia, you think of KTM, Brad Binder's already very competitive, Aleix Espargaro for Aprilia. But then there are other riders inside the same manufacturer groups that are kind of struggling to get to that level. I mean, Portimao is a place where they're not suddenly going to discover anything magical to raise their competitiveness, right? Just because of the nature of the track. I mean, are we likely to see Maverick Vinales suddenly quicker than Aleix, or are we going to see Bastianini, a couple of tenths faster than Bagnaia. I mean, what do you think?
Well, first of all, Qatar, I used to say you never learn anything in Qatar. The points are the same, but how your bike works, how the chassis works especially, you don't learn a lot. So that could be good news for Bezzecchi, because he must be crying. So things can only get better for him. But that was a full disaster what happened to him in Qatar. Let me start by Marc Marquez. I have a good feeling for Marc Marquez here, especially because Marc is trying something unnatural. He has to ride a bike in an unnatural way. Unnatural for everybody and very unnatural for Marc Marquez. But he knows he has to try it in order to be as fast as Pecco and start to beat him. That was especially the case in Qatar, but that is less so the case here. Here you can be a little bit adventurous. All the ups and downs and all the over-tight corners. Talent is probably more important in Portimao than riding the bike exactly as the bike was designed when we speak about the Ducati. And that could be leading to a surprise of Marc Marquez, for a surprise effort, but as well for Bezzecchi. He struggles with the same issue with last year's Ducati as Bastianini was struggling a lot. And it's a complete different way, apparently complete, because complete enough different to get him offline completely. He struggles a lot with the feedback he gets from the engine brake and the trust he doesn't get from how the engine brake helps him trying to do the last turning in on the corner with lots of braking and your fork still very, very deep. He doesn't get the feedback that he expects there. But on a very flat track in Qatar with 1,000 laps of trying and testing, everything is on the limit here. If the bike's not too far off and he's in good spirits, he can make the difference. But then again, leaving Portimao, you still don't know if you learn a lot. But that's the good thing in racing at the moment. Portimao, Qatar, what a difference.
Portimao will host round 2 of the championship, and then we go to Austin, Texas for round 3 and back to the Iberian Peninsula for the Spanish Grand Prix at the end of April. Jerez, as ever, is one of the coolest meetings on the calendar. Great vibe, usually excellent weather, busy crowd and a compact atmospheric venue. KTM's Motorsport Marketing Division will have a brand new for 2024 trailer and promotional stand in the commercial area. So all fans of the Orange can try and buy the latest Powerwear goods and Red Bull KTM replica gear once we get to Spain. All those planning a trip to Jerez, make sure or make a note to check out the new KTM rig. Okay, guys, on to the last phase of the podcast, predictions. The Alpine Stars Paddock Pass Podcast Fantasy League is now up and running. And with 20 Grand Prix still to go, it's not too late to join. Our friends A-Stars will be giving a prize package to the winner at the end of the season. So simply search for Alpine Stars Paddock Pass Podcast in the MotoGP Leagues tab and get on board. Guys, I have Pecco Bagnaia and Brad Binder as my gold riders. And, when it comes to the Grand Prix this weekend, I'm not changing them. So I think that probably tells you everything about where my head is at for race predictions. Neil, who are you leaning towards?
Well, I had some dramas with my fantasy team, as I detailed in excruciatingly boring detail last week in last week's pod. So I won't do that again. But my initial picks were Pecco and Martin. Those are the two guys fighting it out for the sprint success last year, and I think they're two pretty good bets for this year as well. Although I don't think I'm really saying anything that crazy. But yeah, I think Peter's point about Marc will be interesting. I mean, Acosta has a sensational record at Portimao. He won his 2 races there in Moto3 in 2021 as a rookie, and he was part of that crazy Turn 2 pile-up in 2022, which caught out, I think, 8-9 riders. So bit of a weird race there. You can't really read too much from that result, but then won, of course, last year as well. So yeah, I think, it's obviously going to be very tricky for him to adapt on the MotoGP bike to this track in such a short space of time. But Peter was saying about natural talent. I mean, Pedro is ridiculously naturally talented and has had a good record here. So I'm really interested to see whether he can be up there fighting in the top 6 again. So yeah.
Dave, I'm going to ask you next to let our guest go last, and also because we still have another hour left on the call, so there's plenty of time for you to do your predictions.
Well, I mean, I guess it's going to be simple. Pecco Bagnaia is going to do the double again like he did last year. which is why I've got him in my fantasy team. I still don't understand how you managed to have both Pecco Bagnaia. In fact, the same for Neil. How you haven't managed to have both Pecco Bagnaia and Brad Binder in there when that's such a massive wodge of cash. I have Fabio Di Giannantonio as my number 2 rider, and I think I'm going to keep. In fact, I don't think I'm going to change my team because I think it's going to be fine. It's going to be interesting to see what Aprilia can do because Aprilia was really, really fast here, and Maverick, the random number generator, can turn up. He could quite easily finish second, but he could also quite easily finish 22nd. I think that's going to be, and I'm really, really looking forward to see what KTM can do because I think this could be a very strong weekend for the KTMs because the track sort of suits the KTM riders, Binder and Miller, and also I think it suits the bike a bit. And the bike has made a big step this year. So if anyone is going to ruin Pecco Bagnaia's day, I think it's going to be Brad Binder.
Peter, I think David might have left you 1 or 2 riders on the grid to be able to advocate for the Grand Prix this weekend. And please bear in mind that if you're wrong and David's right, then you're going to have to eat some humble pie, as we like to say on this podcast. But what's your feeling for the Grand Prix?
Yeah, it has to be Pecco. I can't put any new name. It has to be Pecco. And like you did, Brad Binder is the most logic thing. And then there's all sorts of hopes, and you can put. I tend usually to put people really high because I hope, but I really can't explain it. But we all want to see Brad Binder on the top. Hard. Marc Marquez can be the joker, the surprise here. And like Neil said, if Pedro Acosta does something, because what he did in Qatar can also be easily overstated, because he did all the things he shouldn't do, and everybody knew he shouldn't do. Probably him himself as well in the race, but he put himself in the picture because it was a suicide run. But at least he showed I can do it if I want. I can make these mistakes. But the way he was riding the bike in Qatar, the way he sits on it, the way he handles the bike, gives me a very, very good feeling for this track. So he could come away from this race, and everybody will look even more surprised than Qatar. That's not a dream. That can happen. The KTM is quite good, and the agility of the KTM can be such a strong tool to have on this track. Yeah, for different reasons, but you have to call it. I mean, you have to say Pecco.
It's an interesting point about Acosta that you made there, Peter, which is that it actually validates KTM's decision to put him in the GasGas Tech 3 team because he can go in and he can do all sorts of stupid things, which is exactly what you want as a rookie. Exactly. You want the freedom to make mistakes, and there's much more freedom to make mistakes in a satellite team than there is in a factory team.
Do we not think that Oliveira's there with a 2024 RSGP?
100%.
Well, I'm not too convinced.
I'll say Aleix as well. Yeah.
If any Aprilia, it's usually Aleix. Yeah, Maverick needs all the stars in line. There has to be Marquez has to take 5 people out and whatever, and then suddenly Maverick is there, but he will not attack. And when he attacks, he does it wrong, and he will not overtake. So, no, not my money on Maverick, not at all.
And Peter, just thanks for joining us on the podcast. But just before we let you go, just a quick word on Yamaha. I mean, Fabio Quartararo is a double winner at Portimao. Obviously has the talent, but the Japanese not quite there yet with the M1 and the competitiveness, right?
No, they are in a tragic phase. They are given all the concessions points, and obviously, it's way too early to accept them to do enough with the concessions point. What they started to do was at least making more adventurous changes on the geometry, at least on the geometry side of things, which gave Fabio good hope, because finally something is happening. Even if I don't go faster with it, there is a new wind in the box with Max, and now they start to at least throwing quicker, more parts at it and doing more adventurous things with making the bike long, short, high. But at the moment they are in completely lost. They are not lost in the way that they don't know why they are slow, but they have a crap bike. He knows it. The bike's crap, and it will take for long. And the real proof will be if at halfway through the season, Yamaha hasn't shown up somewhere with some spectacular improvements, it's not going to happen. And he knows that. So he will call some teams, be in contact with some teams. We all know which bikes he would fit on beautifully, but it's too early to speculate. He will just sit out the drama here in Portimao, because even in Qatar, usually the Yamaha, especially in Qatar, the Yamaha could always do something, because okay, Qatar has a long straight, but other than that, it's just fast and flowing. And with the Yamaha's nature, when it was still really the Yamaha, he could make up for that. But now the Yamaha find almost nothing extra, and they lost some of their special things. So now they're completely in nowhere land. It's hard to say, actually, because I love the bike. I love the Yamaha. I love the way the Yamaha does the lap time, and the Yamaha was able to overtake. But at the moment, it's tragic.
Well, on that cheery note for Yamaha fans, that's it. Thank you ever so much, Peter, for coming on the podcast.
Thank you guys for having me on the podcast. It's an honor. It's the most famous podcast in the world. I've listened hundreds of kilometers on the Duitse Autobahn to your podcast. So, no, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for listening, everyone. We'll be back with a free Paddock Note show from Thursday at the Algarve International Circuit. We'll then have more note shows on Friday and Saturday for our Paddock Insider level subscribers, as well as a Digia interview. On Sunday, we'll produce another 3 notes race wrap, and then we'll be back next week. Don't forget that Steve will also be busy at the Catalan round of World SBK, so plenty of content coming up.